Okay. So I am sensitive, especially to those concerns that a couple of you had that I was kind of doing this out of order. And so I wanted to make sure that we got everything lined up properly. So the test for test 2 will still stay the same. It will be after October 10th. So it will be the week of October 10th, as we stated already. It will be chapters 4 and 5, means I'm going to slow things down. So you're going to be getting out early, so contain your disappointment. But just want to make sure you know that we're all copacetic on that, okay? So this chapter is chapter 5. This chapter entails the other 3 major questions that need to be answered when we are designing channel structures and strategies. And so if we go back to chapter 4, we had the major decisions of make versus buy. Chapter 5 is going to deal with 3 questions that are important and need to be answered. They will be channel intensity, which is how in-depth and how much distribution we should have for our goods. Channel type, which is which unique channels should we use. And then finally, dual distribution, which is whether we should sell directly to the consumer at the same time we use traditional channels. So in essence, what the dual distribution means is in vertical market and traditional structure at the same times, and the damaging aspect of it, however, there are reasons why you do it anyway. So without further ado, let us go roll through our decision making and let's talk about these channel decisions. So here are 3 strategic decisions that we need to ponder. The first is channel intensity. How much coverage the supplier should have in all of its various forms. The channel types. How do you go to market? And how do you find ways of combining these formats together in some kind of reasonable success? And then finally, dual distribution, which is should the supplier simultaneously go to the market through its own channels and through third-party channels. In essence, we're having our cake, or actually it's eating your cake and having it too. That's the proper way of stating it. Should we do a vertical market strategy and a traditional classic marketing structure at the same time? Channel intensity, before I go on, is very much wrapped around the categories of products many times that you sell. And so in 1923, when marketing was first split off from economics, the very first categories of products that we sell were finally introduced. And we had these 3 categories. We had convenience goods, were those items that were purchased at the most convenient places. These were categorized as staples, those goods that you buy every day. meat, bread, eggs. They are also convenience items, which is the closest place is all I care about. These are where the goods are massively sold, highly generic in their way, and that you would not go out of your way to get. And then the last item is what's called an emergency item. And this is an item that, where quite simply, you've got to have it and you'll find it in the closest place possible. So you can bet that in stores right now, they're putting their umbrellas at the front, okay? So these are convenience goods. That's the first thing. The second one is shopping goods. And shopping goods are those items that invite comparison. As a matter of fact, these are goods that you actually wish to compare and contrast against others. These are items that you prefer to see more than one at the same time. And it is one of those unique specialized things to recognize that shopping goods sell more when there's more unique kinds of goods to compare and contrast with. It is not surprising that at a Walmart, when you go in the electronics department, that they have 40 screens there. Because if they only had one screen, they would never sell as well as if they had 40. Consumers desire contrast and comparison with shopping goods. The third type is what are called specialty goods, and these are where consumers will go out of their way to go find. These are goods that are considered unique, special, and not only does the consumer desire to go find them, but there's the expectation that they're difficult to attain, and that makes them all the more desirable. Now, the last good, and you won't see anything on the test, but the fourth good was called unsought goods. These were introduced in the 70s, and these are goods that consumers do not actively seek, and yet they need. Insurance, burial sites. My mother, when Katrina came and she lost practically everything and she was getting compensation back, this was like 2005, she called me and she said, David, I want you to know that I purchased a burial plot in Long Beach, so there'll be a place for me to go. And I went, well, that's good, Mom. And she said, oh, and I bought one for you, and I bought one for Lynn, and I bought one for Jewel, my children. And I was about to say something, and I thought, that gave my mother comfort. I mean, to know that I had a place to go just in case I didn't have any other place. But what could you say? Thanks, Mom. So I said thanks. Okay. So anyway, yeah, so I have a burial plot. I'm happy. So let's talk about these one at a time, as I've said. The first is intensive distribution. Now I want you to think, now that we've got the categories of goods up, I want you to think about how each one of these fits in with the goods themselves. Intensive distribution is where a brand can be purchased in as many possible outlets in a given trade area. More is better. Now, the difficulty with intensive distribution is every good eventually reaches what's called a saturation. In essence, you have no other place or no other location. You have so many places and locations that you actually start hurting the dealers who are investing in your particular product. Now, the other part of that, on the other side, and if you think of these, is exclusive distribution, where it can be purchased only through one vendor in a given trade area. How do you define a trade area? Depends on the good itself and how unique and special it is. How many outlets should a manufacturer consider when they're attempting to distribute? Upstream members have to determine how much activity they wish to pursue. And selectivity many times is guided by the categories of products that they sell. With a downstream member, they have to consider how many competing products that they also have to sell to. And now we're about to get in to the discussion of where conflict starts to begin. Manufacturer, quite simply by their basic definition, wants to sell as many as they possibly can. They are firm believers in being as intensive as possible. And yet, they are also guided by a general rule. And the general rule says is that the more intensive I am in terms of my distribution, the less influence I have as a manufacturer on how those channel members perform their channel functions. I reduce my ability to strong-arm vendors, strong-arm retailers, downstream partners, when I simply flood the market with as many ones as I can. And so here is the concept of what a manufacturer works with. How much distribution do I need? Do my goods, in order to achieve success, need some control? Steel is one of those interesting corporations because they actually work in two directions. One, they limit themselves only to independent distributors. You'll never see them in a home improvement center, which is not a hardware store. A home improvement center is a home improvement center. They sell products, but they don't sell necessarily the services that go along with them. Steel goes through independent dealers where they can demand a certain level of service, but they give enormous benefits in return. And so, how much control do I wish? The downstream partners have a totally different perspective. In their trading areas, they prefer and sometimes even demand exclusivity. They want to be the only distributor of a given product. Which means they do have to deal with competition, but with two different types. The first is intra-brand competition. Intra-brand competition is the competition that takes place of sellers of the same brand of merchandise. Think Walmart, I'll say Circuit City. What's the other one? Electronic store. Best Buy, excuse me. The same camera in the same town in two different stores, that's intra-brand competition. There's competition in price between those two. There is also inter-brand competition. And this is competition that takes place in one store with different brands in the same product category. And so in a Walmart, you will have a dozen different computers, more than a dozen different televisions. And this is not a bad thing for Walmart, and it's not a bad thing for consumers. It's a good thing because consumers desire choice. And with fewer brands, there are fewer choices. Now, having said this, the store would like to be the only one in that trade area where all of those brands are. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen. So these are the downstream members' perspectives and the upstream members' perspectives. How many should I have? The manufacturers, the upstream providers want as many places as they can, but they have to recognize that the many or the more that they have, the less control that they have, versus the downstream partner who wants to have as many brands as they can, but they want to control the territory for all of those brands in that group. Now, there's one other factor that can change the whole mix, and that is the brand equity, the brand strength. There are brands that are so powerful and so strong that they can dictate any kinds of terms that they wish. And so they don't have to go through these particular choices that they have to make. There is no worries that they're going to be the only game out there. So an example of this also is Coke. So Coca-Cola doesn't worry about promotional considerations. They don't really worry about their downstream partners. Sellers try to carry as many a variety as they can in the inventory, and the difficulty is, quite simply, is they can't stop selling it because the counting losses that they would suffer would be difficult. Except when you got a locked-in contract, like they have here at Appalachian State, and I have to smuggle my Cokes in behind enemy lines in order to be able to drink a Coke. Go in there, man, it's like Pepsi's everything. I'll tell you, though, Pepsi is a smart corporation. Pepsi won the cola wars in a way by losing them. In the 90s, when they tried to stop trying to battle Coke, one-on-one, Pepsi decided, well, what are we going to do better? Well, Pepsi decided that they were going to invest in things that they do well in other locations. So Pepsi started to do things like buy fast order food places. They bought KFC. They bought Taco Bell. They bought A&W root beer, but didn't actually buy the root beer, if that makes a lot of sense. They bought, Pizza Hut. I'm trying to remember what else they bought. Oh gosh, I can't. They started creating these fusion stores. They started putting them together. They did so successfully. They spun off a whole other corporation called Wow. Pepsi bought Gatorade, and Coke did not even put in a bid. I mean, because they had Powerade, which is like 15% of the market. They could have at least strong-armed Pepsi to force them to pay more money, but no, they didn't. Anyway, so, but what can alternatives do they have? Well, the alternatives is that a downstream provider, if they don't want to be able to fight this is they either do three things. One of it is they just discontinue the brand or substitute it completely. It's not a winning situation, but you know, it's one of the ways that you can try to get around it. The other is you can just get out of that product category completely, and you see corporations like IBM doing this when quite simply they've had enough trying to fight in a market like personal computers. They just didn't want to be in it anymore. And then others is you can simply try to convert the users. All right. One way or another, intra-brand competition gets resolved. Realize this is that situations, especially like this, where there's pressure, a lot of times you just go along with it. Other times you find alternatives, but one way or another, it'll resolve itself. Here's the difficulty, and this is what downstream members do, these are the things that create tensions in the downstream markets. So the first thing that you see is a concept known as bait and switch. Bait and switch is difficult to try to define. It is against the law. However, it is very difficult to prove in court. So what is bait and switch? This is the way it goes. So I used to work for Con Appliances. There's a Con Appliances actually down the mountain in Estonia. This was a Con Appliances in Lafayette, Louisiana. I learned more about sales in doing that one thing for like 4 months, and I made more money than I ever had until now. But anyway, every Monday we would have a sales meeting. And so what they would do, and the way that you would get around this is you would have one item like a Sony portable television, and that thing was priced down to cost barely. All right. And so that was the item that was the #1 promotional item in the advertisements. And they'd have 12 of them, maybe 12. And so they would put that on sale on a Saturday, which is the busiest retail selling day at that time. People would come in early, buy those 12 televisions up. The televisions are gone. What would happen by 11:30 is they would say, I'm sorry, we've already sold out our stock. Let's go look at another item. This other item would have a higher margin. It would satisfy our contracts with Sony, but it would also allow us to go to another item where we had a greater margin and be able to survive more. Ethical, but that's the way business was. So bait and switch is when a downstream member advertises one brand to get the customers to visit that site, which is the bait. Then you persuade, spit out there. Then you persuade the end users to buy another brand on which the seller earns a higher profit. It is not surprising that Walmart sells Hisense right next to their other ones, such as Samsung and LG and all the others and Sony's. There's a reason for that. Because even at those lower margins for their television, the lower prices, they actually make higher margins and higher money than they do when they sell the Samsungs or let's just say the lead brands, okay? By the way, if you got a Hisense, make sure that you turn off, it has a phoning home system in it. So everything that you ever see is being sent directly upstream to a main server in China, just to let you know, okay? Go in your Hisense, go to settings, go to advertisements, and limit the upstream or phoning home that it does. You're welcome. So the next one is free riding. And when I was at when I was at Con Appliances in Lafayette, we sold Mitsubishi televisions exclusively. Well, I shouldn't say exclusively. There was another dealer just outside the lines of Lafayette called New Generation. And New Generation sold Mitsubishi televisions as well, but they actually were a much bigger corporation and they bought from a Canada distributor where we bought from the United States. So me and another guy, Tim Schooler, we really aced up on televisions, learning all the particulars, all of those things. And so when a customer would come in and ask, what's the best television to watch football? We would have everything that we need to know about the Mitsubishi Diamond Vision. So Diamond Vision in the 80s, in terms of lumens and Lambert brightness, beat everything, even Sony's Trinitron, by like 50% on live events. There are other times like Sony was superior, but in live events, nothing was better. So we'd spend hours talking to customers. And then what they would do is they would be able to go outside the new generation and buy the Mitsubishis from them at like a 10% reduced price that we couldn't simply match. And so this is the concept of free riding. You spend hours learning about a product from a store like us, and then you'd go buy it somewhere else. It meant that as a company, we bore the costs and another store got the benefit. We complained, not that it did us any good. And at some point, we just simply took what we had because, quite honestly, we were selling quite a few Mitsubishis. But it really is depressing when you spend that time, imparting knowledge and knowing, or let's just say when that customer walks out, you go, oh gosh, they're going to new generation. So these are the things that create conflict between downstream providers and the upstream providers. And it's just something that you live with when it's determining the channel intensity. So this is an example, Royal Canin, which is a full line of pet foods. It was developed by a friend of vet, but they believe that their success was in limiting distribution. And so they did not sell through major distributors such as Walmart. They sold through pet stores and garden stores. They demanded and maintained a certain level of exclusivity. And it worked. They offered the information at the retailers. The retailers were specialized in their own ways anyway, which meant that you avoided the general merchandise individuals who were coming in, particularly looking for bargains, but were looking for quality in a given area, and it worked. This is an example of how limiting distribution made you more successful. Now, as I said before, the upstream members want to have as many outlets as they can. But here's the problem, is that once you reach a certain peak, the downstream partners lose interest in carrying your goods or even pushing them. I want to sell goods that make my store sustainable. It's as simple as that. And so there are 4 ways that I can be able to manipulate this, and we're going to talk about them one at a time. It's these 4. The first is contractual. The demands basically to be a distributor require certain standards of conduct. And with those things written in, it means that a super organization could not run roughshod over the smaller ones that are going by the law. This is the exact reason, by the way, that you'll never see steel in a Home Depot or a Lowe's. It's not that they're bad stores, but quite simply, their strategy is built on an entirely different model. A Lowe's will not have a full-time service staff. They won't. They will contract that, but they're not going to pay the money to have 2 or 3 individuals just there doing repairs. The next is you try to make everybody happy, and you have a pull strategy. So if you remember the different ones, push and a pull, the push is where the manufacturer sells to the wholesaler through their selling efforts sell to the retailer, and the retailer through their efforts sell down to the end user. A pull strategy is where the manufacturer sells directly to the consumer or advertises directly to them, and the consumer desire pulls the goods through the system. An example of that is Sony's brand equity. Sony's brand, even though it's been tarnished lately, is so strong that it can sell through any channel whatsoever. And it's kind of unique, especially when you have brands that are so strong that they're advertised by stores that are not even authorized dealers. And so the apple juice over here does repairs on apples. They sell, reconditioned apples, but they are not authorized as apple dealers in any way whatsoever. Now, they may be authorized services. But that's an example of such a strong brand that they can basically plant their flag and people come running. Difficulty with having such a strong brand is the unavoidable temptation to overproduce. And so Barbie, in its arc, had this phenomenal brand equity during the 90s that they expanded 90 models to 450 and produced a market saturation, that dreaded saturation in which Barbie's brand equity actually started to erode. The next is what's called RPM, resale price maintenance. Retail price maintenance says that the manufacturer sets a price floor in which no others can sell that product below. And probably the last one, and probably what I would consider the most widely applicable, is selectivity. Where you decide how much coverage you aim to achieve and how large your brand assortment is. Because, as I've said before, selectivity, in essence, brings about what you would consider exclusivity. You have to be able to, I wouldn't say limit your coverage, but fine tune it to be able to achieve your goals. Now, in some countries, you can't price your items in a given way, that there's a certain amount of pricing behavior that is restricted. Not in the United States, except when you consistently sell your goods below cost. That's against the rules. So anyway, in this first part of intensity, recognize that both the downstream partners and the upstream partners have a difference of opinion. The downstream partners demand that they control they control an area, that they want to be the exclusive seller, and the upstream partners, all they care about is simply selling in as many ways as possible. And this inherent conflict ultimately leads to some of the difficulty in the upstream and the downstream partners interacting together. All right, we're going to stop it there. Remember, those papers are due tonight at 11:59, it doesn't matter.
You said it was
I'm sorry, Thursday. Wait, I'm sorry, today is Tuesday.
Yeah. Do we?
I have lost my mind, excuse me.
Do we meet with our groups?
Oh, it's 11:40, so you've got time to meet with your groups if you want to. Go right ahead, okay? All right. Don't listen to me.
Monday, did we just leave it?
All right, I'll leave it at Monday, okay?
Yay. Yeah, it said on the syllabus it was due on Monday, but I don't think you had changed the date on that.
No, that's all right, go ahead. It is due next Monday, done, okay? Petition paper is due on a Monday. Okay, QED. Oh.